The office party had gone on longer than Maya had expected. She hadn't wanted to attend in the first place. These things always left her drained rather than energized. But after weeks of declining invitations, she had finally agreed. She told herself it would be good to show up, to prove to everyone she was still part of the team despite keeping a low profile since the divorce. The rooftop venue was buzzing with chatter, laughter, and clinking glasses. Fairy lights twinkled overhead, soft music played in the background, and the younger employees seemed to thrive in the chaos, drifting from group to group with ease. Maya kept mostly to the corner, her wine glass in hand, smiling politely whenever someone approached. She was used to it by now, being noticed for a few seconds, complimented on her poise, then forgotten as the younger crowd flowed elsewhere. It wasn't bitterness she felt, but a quiet acceptance. At 42, she didn't expect to command attention the way she once had. But then there was Adrian. He was 12 years younger, one of the more recent hires in her department, and unlike most, he never seemed intimidated by her quiet nature. He didn't try too hard to impress, nor did he hover around her like some did out of courtesy. He simply saw her in a way that felt disarming. Throughout the evening, whenever her eyes wandered across the room, she found his gaze on her, calm, steady, almost questioning. By the time the party wound down, it was past midnight. Maya excused herself politely, slipping away before the last round of toasts could begin. She preferred the silence of the night over drunken goodbyes. In the lobby of the building, she pulled her shawl closer and tapped her phone, ready to book a ride. The city streets outside glowed faintly under the street lamps, the weekend hum quieter now. She felt the tired ache in her feet and longed for her bed. Leaving already? The voice startled her. She turned to find Adrian standing by the glass doors, his suit jacket draped casually over one arm. His tie was loosened, and his dark hair had fallen slightly out of place, but there was a liveliness in his expression that didn't match the late hour. "Yes," Maya said softly. "It's late. I think I've had enough for one night." He stepped closer, his tone easy. "Let me drop you home. It's not safe to wait for a car out here." She raised a brow. "I'll be fine, Adrian. I can manage." "I know you can," he said, his lips curving in a faint smile. "But humor me. My car's right outside. It's on my way anyway." Maya hesitated. She hated inconveniencing people, and besides, she had always been careful about keeping professional boundaries. But something in his steady, almost protective gaze made her pause. It wasn't pity she saw there. It was insistence and perhaps a touch of concern. Finally she nodded. "All right. If you're sure." The cool night air greeted them as they stepped outside. Adrian led the way to a sleek black sedan parked just down the street. He opened the passenger door for her, a small gesture, but one that caught her off guard. It had been years since anyone had done that for her. "Thank you," she murmured as she slipped inside. The car smelled faintly of leather and cedarwood. When Adrian slid into the driver's seat, the quiet hum of the engine filled the silence. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The city rolled past in a blur of dim lights and empty streets. Maya leaned her head back slightly, feeling the weight of the evening settle in her shoulders. "You didn't seem like you were enjoying yourself much tonight," Adrian said finally, his voice low but steady. Maya turned her head toward him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I wasn't miserable, if that's what you mean. I'm just not very good at these things anymore." "Anymore?" he asked, glancing at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "I used to enjoy them. Years ago. But now? I don't know. Small talk feels heavier than it used to." She exhaled softly. "Maybe I've just changed." Adrian nodded thoughtfully. "Or maybe the crowd has. Not everyone fits into that kind of noise." She studied him for a moment. Most of her colleagues would have brushed off her words or tried to convince her otherwise. But Adrian wasn't dismissing her. He was understanding. "Did you enjoy yourself?" she asked, almost to turn the focus away from herself. He gave a short laugh. "Not really. I talked to a few people, smiled at the right moments, but I kept noticing you standing off to the side. You looked like you were somewhere else entirely." Her breath caught slightly. "You noticed that?" "I notice more than people think," he replied simply. Maya looked away, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her shawl. That quiet statement lingered in the air, stirring something inside her she couldn't quite name. They drove in silence for a while, the rhythm of the tires on the road oddly comforting. Finally, Adrian spoke again, his tone softer this time. You seemed lighter when you left the party, like you just put down something heavy. Maya gave a faint smile. Or maybe I was just relieved it was over. No, he said gently. It was different. I don't know how to explain it. You just looked more yourself. His words unsettled her. How could someone she'd only known professionally, someone so much younger, read her so easily? She had spent years perfecting the art of keeping her inner world hidden. Yet here he was, unraveling it with casual observations. She cleared her throat. You have an interesting way of seeing people, Adrian. He smiled faintly, eyes still on the road. Maybe I just pay attention. The weight of his words pressed on her chest. For a long time after her divorce, Maya had felt invisible. Not because people ignored her, but because no one truly looked at her anymore. Not as a woman, not as someone with layers beyond her responsibilities. But here in this car, with Adrian's quiet sincerity filling the space, she felt seen. And that frightened her more than she wanted to admit. Do you always do this? She asked carefully. Do what? Disarm people with words that are far too thoughtful for midnight car rides. He laughed softly. Not always. Just when I mean them. The road stretched ahead, quiet and endless. Maya's heart beat a little faster, though she forced herself to stay composed. When he finally pulled into her neighborhood, the car slowed under the dim glow of streetlights. The houses stood still, shadows spilling across their neat lawns. Maya felt a pang of reluctance. She wasn't ready for the night to end, not after a conversation that had left her strangely alive. Adrian parked in front of her house, turning off the engine. The silence that followed was thick, heavier than anything they had shared inside the office walls. Thank you for the ride, Maya said softly, her hand on the door handle. He looked at her, then really looked at her. His gaze was steady, intense without being forceful. You don't have to thank me. I wanted to. Maya felt her breath hitch. For a fleeting second she wanted to say something more, something reckless. But the walls she had built around herself over the years kept her still. Good night, Adrian, she whispered instead, her voice softer than she intended. Good night, Maya. As she stepped out of the car and walked toward her front door, she felt his gaze follow her. The night air was cool against her skin, but inside something burned quietly. A spark she hadn't felt in a long, long time. And as the door closed behind her, Maya knew this night was only the beginning. Maya thought the night was over. She expected to slip inside her house, shed her shawl, and let the silence wash over her like a familiar blanket. But the silence felt different tonight. Heavier, lonelier. She lingered by the front door for a moment, keys in her hand, before glancing back through the curtains. Adrian's car was still there. Engine off. Headlights dark. But he hadn't driven away. For a long moment, she stood frozen, torn between curiosity and restraint. He wasn't doing anything. Just sitting, hands on the steering wheel, as though debating with himself. Then, almost against her own better judgment, Maya opened the door again and stepped back into the night. The sound of her heels on the pavement caught his attention. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face, followed by something softer. You didn't leave, she said, her voice low. I wasn't sure I should, Adrian admitted. It didn't feel right to just drive away. Her chest tightened. She should have told him it was late, that he needed rest, that she was fine. But the words refused to form. Instead, she found herself asking something she hadn't planned. Do you want to come in? For coffee. For a split second she regretted it. It was too forward, too personal. But Adrian didn't hesitate. He simply nodded. If you're sure. Inside, the house smelled faintly of vanilla and freshly laundered clothes. Maya switched on a soft lamp in the living room, the glow casting warm shadows against the walls. She set her shawl aside, trying to shake the unease coiling inside her chest. Adrian stood near the doorway, his hands tucked into his pockets. He didn't move too far, as though respecting the invisible boundaries of her space. Make yourself comfortable, she said gently. I'll get the coffee. In the kitchen, she busied herself with the familiar routine, grinding beans, heating water, finding 2 cups. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked. She hadn't invited anyone into her home in months. The house had been hers alone since the divorce, a quiet refuge where she could exist without being seen. And yet here she was, making coffee for a man 12 years younger, a man whose presence was already stirring emotions she thought she had buried. When she returned, Adrian was seated on the couch, his jacket folded neatly beside him. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes lifted to hers with the same steady focus that had unsettled her in the car. "Thank you," he said as she handed him a cup. Their fingers brushed briefly, and the warmth of the contact lingered longer than it should have. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping the bitter drink. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, full of unspoken words. Finally, Adrian set his cup down on the table. "Can I ask you something?" Maya nodded, though a flicker of hesitation passed through her. "Why do you always keep to yourself at work?" His voice was gentle, not accusing. "You're brilliant, respected. Everyone looks up to you. But it feels like you're holding back from letting anyone really know you." Maya's chest ached. She set her own cup down, her hands folded tightly together. "Because I learned the hard way that people don't always stay. And when they leave, it hurts less if you didn't let them all the way in to begin with." Adrian's gaze softened. "That's from your divorce, isn't it?" She flinched slightly, though she shouldn't have been surprised. Her colleagues knew, of course, they just never brought it up. Adrian wasn't prying, though. His tone carried no judgment, only curiosity, maybe even concern. "Yes," she whispered. "It's been 3 years, but some wounds don't really fade. You learn to live with them." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "What happened?" She hesitated. It wasn't a story she told easily, but something about Adrian's presence, his quiet, steady patience, made her feel safe enough to share. "We were married for 15 years, she began slowly. "It started beautifully. We were partners, best friends even. But somewhere along the way, life became routines. Work, bills, raising our daughter. We stopped seeing each other as people. He began drifting, I began hardening. By the time we realized how far apart we'd grown, it was too late." Her voice cracked slightly. She hadn't expected the memories to sting so much after all this time. "He fell in love with someone else. And I let him go. Because holding on to something broken only hurts everyone." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing at first. His silence wasn't awkward, it was respectful, as though giving her space to breathe. "You didn't deserve that," he said finally, his voice low. "You gave him 15 years of your life. He should have fought for you." Maya blinked back unexpected tears. People always think of divorce as a failure. But sometimes it's just a quiet acknowledgement that love isn't enough. And maybe that's the hardest part. Realizing love alone can't keep two people together. Adrian's eyes lingered on her, steady and unwavering. "You're wrong about one thing. It's not you who failed. It was him who couldn't see what he had." Her throat tightened. She looked away, afraid of the intensity in his gaze. Afraid of what it was doing to her. "I don't want to talk about him anymore," she whispered. "Then we won't," Adrian said softly. The silence that followed was thick but not empty. Maya felt the weight of his presence beside her, the warmth of it pressing against the fragile walls she had built around herself. "You know what scares me most?" she admitted suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not the divorce. Not being alone. What scares me is that maybe I've forgotten how to be seen as anything other than someone's mother, someone's coworker. Roles. Labels. But not me." Adrian's expression softened in a way that made her chest ache. "I see you, Maya. Not as roles. Not as labels. Just you." Her breath caught. His words landed with the same weight his gaze carried. Too heavy, too true. She shook her head faintly, a humorless smile on her lips. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," he said firmly. "And I mean it." For a long time, neither of them moved. The lamp cast soft shadows across the room. The coffee cooled on the table, and the quiet grew louder with every heartbeat. Maya felt a storm rising inside her, one she hadn't felt in years. Finally she stood abruptly, needing space. "It's late. You should go." Adrian rose slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "If that's what you want." But as he reached for his jacket, She caught his hand without thinking. The touch startled them both, and for a moment, the air between them burned with unspoken things. Her voice trembled. I don't know what I want anymore. Adrian's gaze dropped to where her hand held his, then back to her face. His voice was low, steady. Then let yourself find out. You don't have to decide tonight. You just have to let yourself feel again. Maya's heart pounded. She released his hand quickly, stepping back. The storm inside her was too strong, too dangerous. Good night, Adrian, she whispered, though her voice was unsteady. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good night, Maya. When the door closed behind him, Maya leaned against it, her chest heaving. She pressed her hand to her heart, feeling its frantic rhythm. For years she had lived in silence, in routines, in roles. But tonight, with just a few words, Adrian had cracked something open, and she didn't know if she could ever close it again. The following week unfolded with the strange weight of unspoken words. At work, Maya carried herself as she always did. Composed, efficient, professional. She led meetings with calm authority, managed clients with poise, and smiled politely at office chatter. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. But inside, the storm Adrian had awakened rumbled louder each day. She avoided looking at him during team huddles. Avoided lingering in the break room if he was there. Avoided small talk, because even the simplest good morning from his lips threatened to unravel her. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. On Tuesday afternoon, he appeared at her office door. A quiet knock pulling her from the stack of reports she had buried herself in. Do you have a minute? His tone was polite, casual enough that no one passing by would find it unusual. Maya hesitated. She could have said she was busy, that deadlines couldn't wait. But her voice betrayed her before she could gather the lie. Yes. Come in. He closed the door behind him, not all the way, but enough that the buzz of the office dimmed. He stood there for a moment, studying her as though weighing how much to say. You've been avoiding me, he said finally. Her chest tightened. I've been busy. He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You've been busy avoiding me. The directness of his words stole her breath. She lowered her gaze, unable to meet his eyes. Adrian, what happened the other night? It was nothing. I was tired, emotional. I shouldn't have said those things. But you did, he said softly. And I think you meant them. Her fingers curled against the edge of her desk. You don't understand. Then help me, he said, stepping closer, his voice firm but not unkind. Help me understand. The air thickened. She could smell the faint trace of his cologne, feel the quiet pull of his presence. Against her better judgment, the words spilled out. I'm too old for this, she whispered. For you. For whatever this is. Adrian's expression didn't waver. You're 42. That's not old. That's life. That's experience. He paused, his voice softening. And for me, it's exactly what makes you extraordinary. Her breath caught. She wanted to laugh it off, dismiss it as youthful infatuation. But the sincerity in his tone, steady, unwavering, left no room for mockery. You're my co-worker, she said instead, clinging to reason. People would talk. Let them, Adrian replied without hesitation. People always talk. But they don't live your life, Maya. You do. Her eyes stung. She hadn't realized how deeply the loneliness had carved into her until now. Until faced with someone who not only saw it but refused to look away. She turned abruptly, staring out the window, her arms wrapped around herself as though holding her heart in place. You're too young. You don't know what it's like to be left behind. To feel like you've passed your chance at being loved the way you once dreamed of. There was a pause. Then the soft sound of footsteps approaching. Adrian's voice came from just behind her, low and steady. You think love has an age limit? That it expires after a certain number of birthdays? Her throat tightened. He moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that his presence warmed her back. I see you, Maya. Not as someone broken. Not as someone's ex-wife. Just you. And I wish you could see yourself the way I do. The words shattered something inside her. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the wave of emotion threatening to break. You should go, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please. For a long moment, silence hung between them. She braced herself for protest, for persuasion. But instead Adrian stepped back. "All right," he said quietly. "But I'm not going to pretend I don't feel what I feel. And I don't think you can either." When the door clicked softly behind him, Maya sagged against the window, her breath shuddering. Her heart felt both heavy and unbearably light. She hated how much truth there was in his words. The storm didn't subside. If anything, it grew louder. On Thursday evening, Maya stayed late at the office. Papers spread across her desk, but she wasn't really working. Her mind replayed every word, every look, every charged silence between them. She startled when a voice broke the quiet. "You're still here." It was Adrian. He leaned against her doorway, jacket slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened from the day. The sight of him so effortlessly relaxed sent a flutter through her chest. "So are you," she replied, trying for casual. "Maybe I was hoping you would be." The honesty in his tone disarmed her. She looked away quickly, gathering her papers as though they offered a shield. "I should go." "I'll walk you out," he said simply. They rode the elevator in silence. The building was nearly empty, the soft hum of machinery filling the space. Maya's pulse quickened, every floor that passed tightening the tension between them. When the doors opened, the night air greeted them cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Adrian walked beside her to the parking lot, his steps unhurried. "Do you want me to drive you again?" he asked. "No, I have my car tonight." He nodded, then hesitated. "Can we not end the night here?" She turned to him, startled. "What do you mean?" "Just a coffee. Or a drive. Nothing more." His voice was calm, but his eyes carried an intensity that made her chest ache. "I just don't want this, whatever this is between us, to stay trapped in stolen moments at work." Maya's breath caught. She should say no. Every rational part of her screamed it. But the loneliness inside her, the ache she had buried for years, whispered louder. "All right," she said softly. "One coffee." They found a small cafe still open near the edge of the city. The place was quiet, nearly empty, with dim lights and the smell of cinnamon in the air. Maya sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. For the first time in years she felt something strange, alive, vulnerable, seen. Adrian studied her in the glow of the cafe lights. "You know, I've admired you since my first day at the company." She blinked. "Admired me? Why?" "Because you walk into a room and command it without ever raising your voice," he said simply. "Because you work harder than anyone and still carry yourself with grace. Because even when you smile, there's something in your eyes that says you've lived through storms, and you're still standing." Her heart clenched. She looked down at her cup, unable to bear the weight of his words. "You make me sound stronger than I feel." "Maybe that's because strength isn't about how you feel," Adrian said softly. "It's about how you keep going even when you don't want to." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the cafe. Maya lifted her gaze slowly, meeting his eyes. For the first time in years, she let herself linger, let herself feel. And the storm inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't done with love after all. The cafe clock ticked quietly in the corner, but neither of them noticed. Maya and Adrian sat across from each other long after their cups had gone cold, words flowing and silences speaking even louder. Maya hadn't talked this much about herself in years. Not the work version of her, not the polite fragments she shared at office lunches, but the raw truths, the kind she usually kept locked away. Adrian listened as if every syllable mattered. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He simply saw her. And being seen felt both terrifying and intoxicating. When they finally stepped outside, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked asphalt. The street was quiet, a few scattered lights glowing in the distance. Maya wrapped her shawl tighter around herself, though it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. Adrian walked beside her, his hands in his pockets, his posture unhurried. For a while they didn't speak. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy, expectant, like something unspoken hovered just out of reach. When they reached her car, she turned to him, her keys in hand. "Thank you. For tonight." He tilted his head slightly. "You're thanking me for listening? For reminding me I'm still human," she admitted softly. "Not just a divorced woman who works too much." His jaw tightened. his eyes searching hers with a steadiness that made her pulse quicken. Maya, you are so much more than that. I wish you could see what I see when I look at you. Her throat closed. She should say goodbye. She should get into her car, drive home, and lock the storm back inside her chest. But instead, the words slipped out before she could stop them. What do you see? Adrian stepped closer, his voice low, almost reverent. I see a woman who carries her scars with grace, who's stronger than she knows, softer than she admits, and more beautiful than she allows herself to believe. Her breath caught. No one had spoken to her like that in years. Not even when she was married. Adrian. His name trembled on her lips, half warning, half plea. He stopped just a step away, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not touching her. You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking you for answers or promises or anything. I just need you to know how I feel. The street lamp above them buzzed faintly, casting shadows across his face. Maya's heart pounded so hard it hurt. I can't do this, she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. You're younger, we work together. It's complicated. Life is complicated, Adrian replied softly. But feelings don't wait for perfect circumstances. They just happen. Her eyes burned. She wanted to run, to retreat into the safety of solitude. But she also wanted to stay, to surrender, to feel something real after years of numbness. Adrian, I'm afraid, she confessed, her voice breaking. He exhaled slowly, his gaze unwavering. So am I. But maybe the scariest things are the ones worth feeling. The silence that followed was deafening. And then, without thinking, without planning, Maya lifted her hand. She touched his face lightly, almost trembling. The stubble along his jaw was rough beneath her palm, the warmth of his skin grounding and dangerous all at once. Adrian didn't move at first. His breath caught, his eyes closing briefly as though memorizing the moment. Then he opened them, meeting her gaze with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. Maya! She should have pulled away. She should have ended it. But instead she leaned in, just slightly, just enough that the space between them dissolved. The kiss was tentative at first, a brush of lips that stole her breath. It was nothing like she expected, no urgency, no recklessness. Just gentle, reverent, as though he was afraid she'd disappear if he pressed too hard. And God help her, she didn't want to disappear. When they finally broke apart, Maya's chest heaved. She stepped back quickly, her hand flying to her mouth as though to trap the reality of what just happened. This was a mistake, she whispered, her voice shaking. Adrian shook his head slowly. It didn't feel like one. Her eyes stung. You don't understand. If we go down this path, everything changes. Work, life, everything. Maybe that's not a bad thing, he said quietly. But Maya couldn't answer. She turned, fumbling with her keys, desperate for space before the storm inside consumed her completely. I have to go. Adrian didn't stop her. He just stood there, watching, his expression unreadable but his eyes burning with something she dared not name. When she finally slid into her car, her hands trembled against the steering wheel. She started the engine, her reflection in the rearview mirror catching her by surprise. Her lips were flushed, her eyes wide, alive. It was the first time in years she had seen herself not as tired or broken or resigned, but as a woman. As she drove away, she stole one last glance in the mirror. Adrian still stood under the street lamp, watching her car fade into the night. The storm inside her heart hadn't quieted. If anything, it raged louder. But for the first time, Maya wasn't sure she wanted it to stop.